The journeys of our lives. Some journeys are smooth and wonderful, aren't they? We take a trip to a new land, whether it's an exotic overseas exploration or a couple-hour drive to the beach. We experience the native culture. We go sightseeing. We eat different foods. We smell different smells. We see different sights. Some of us call these explorations vacations, these journeys. But then there are the other types of journeys we take in our lives. Ones that come unexpectedly and are mostly unwelcomed. Those journeys of being laid off from work. Those journeys of businesses closing, financial devastation, battling cancer or other illness, a family member struggling with substance misuse, separation, divorce, grieving the losses of those we love. These are life journeys also. Today is our last week of our Advent series. What the Christmas story tells us about angels, dreams, and journeys. The series is based on Adam Hamilton's book entitled The Journey. I do want to preface this message by saying that although much of what I am going to share is paraphrased from this book, and some of it is my own thought, I do quote from it as well, the book, but I don't tell you where I'm quoting because I feel it detracts from the message. So, today we are going to be looking closer at Mary and Joseph's journey. By the way, they will be showing up Christmas Eve in the manger, right? So I did have someone ask me today, do we not have the rest? Right? Right? It's hard to wait. It's hard to wait. We want to see it. We want to see it, right? We're tired of seeing just the animals in the stable. But that's all that was there at this time yet, right? In fact, on Christmas Eve, we're going to be journeying through the people, and one at a time is going to be coming forward, and we're going to be building the nativity scene on Christmas Eve. But I want to start looking at the beginning of Mary's journey. She was visited by this angel Gabriel and responded after some thought and perplexedness and distraught, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. Then she goes and visits Elizabeth. Elizabeth greets Mary, right? And the baby jumps in her womb and says, blessed are you. Who's going to bear the Lord from God. And Mary responds with a beautiful prayer song called the Magnificat. And we're going to hear some of that right now by Deb Hoffman.
This is one of my favorite Advent hymns. And just understand, as you hear it, the second verse is Gabriel speaking, and the third verse is Mary responding. The angel Gabriel from heaven came, his wings as drifted snow, his eyes as flame. All hail, said he, the lowly maiden Mary, most highly favored lady, Gloria. For know a blessed mother you shall be, all generations praise continually. Your son shall be Emmanuel, by seers foretold, most highly favored lady, Gloria. Then gentle Mary meekly bowed her head, to me be as it praises God, she said, my soul shall laud
Then, after Joseph has his dream instructing him about this baby from God and that he is to marry Mary, they get the word from the Roman census that they need to go to Bethlehem. It would be a 10-day journey. What do you think Mary was feeling as Joseph explained that to her? She was 9 months pregnant, and they had to go. She would not know a midwife in Bethlehem. She was physically uncomfortable, to say the least, and undoubtedly anxious about having her baby so far away from her hometown. I wonder what her prayer would have sounded like then, her response. I can picture her crying out to God, "How could you let this happen? I have been faithful. I have trusted you. Now this? Really?" Have you ever felt that way on your life journey? I know I have. In fact, I've said those very words. The Gospels, they don't tell us how Mary was feeling. So we need to read between the lines. We know she's a young woman, 9 months pregnant, hormones raging, and now the last thing she had control over, where she would have the baby, has been taken away from her. And yet, what she doesn't know is that this journey and where Jesus is born will be significant through the ages. God is taking the decision of a greedy Roman emperor and having it serve God's own purposes, which is what God does in our lives as well today. We don't see the bigger picture. So they're getting ready to go to Bethlehem. There are 2 possible routes, literally. One that is usually taken by the Jewish community that goes around Samaria. Some of you might know this, right? The Jewish people thought the Samaritans were They were other. They were just terrible people to avoid. They needed to avoid them. They would travel 20 to 30 miles out of their way by foot, adding 2 days to their journey so to not go through Samaria. And that was the Jewish route. It's believed, well, then there's another route that goes directly through Samaria. That's 2 to 3 days shorter. It's believed that this was the route taken by Mary and Joseph. This route is also known as the Way of the Patriarchs because it was the route taken in 1,600 years of biblical Old Testament history. It's where God appeared to Abram. It's where Jacob had his dream. It's where Joseph was buried. It's where Joshua set up the tent of meeting and the Ark of the Covenant. It's where the prophets Samuel, Elijah, and Elisha ministered. It went right through the valley of Jezreel, where many of the battles were fought in the Old Testament. It was the major route in Old Testament times. When I was in Israel, I got to see it from a distance. It's pretty cool. The other thing to consider is that in Jesus' ministry, Jesus never avoided the Samaritans. In fact, he offered a Samaritan woman living water, and he used the parable of the Good Samaritan as the example of what it really means to love your neighbor. You see, many times, our biases and our prejudices are taught to us by our well-meaning parents and other major influences in our life. It's very possible that Mary and Joseph didn't feel this way about the Samaritans and did not teach this hatred to their son, as other Jewish parents would have taught. So, continuing on the journey, can you imagine how they must have felt that 9th or 10th day when they see Jerusalem? Because from Jerusalem, it's only a few more miles to Bethlehem. Right? It's just like, you know, those long trips you ever take? And you don't say it because you sound like a 10-year-old, but you want to say, are we there? Are we there yet? Now, you know that people were droving into Jerusalem for the census. And we've always been told there was no room in the inn. The innkeeper offers Mary and Joseph a place in the stable, which could have been. But I want us to just consider a little different translation of this story. The Greek word for inn is kataluma. 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 The only other time it's used in the Gospels is when Jesus asks his disciples to find a room where they can have the Passover meal. Kataluma. That wasn't an inn. It was a guest room in a house. This, scholars believe, is the more accurate translation of this, what happened, kataluma, a guest room. See, in the first century, I found this interesting, the first century house would have had 3 rooms. It would have had a kitchen living area, which was all one big room. And it would have had the parents' bedroom, and it would have had the children's bedroom. And when guests would come, the children would sleep in the living kitchen area, and the guests would be in the children's room. And they would sleep on mats. I'm thinking, how would people fit? And they just had mats, remember? So Joseph was from Bethlehem. That's why they had to go for the census. Joseph would have had family in Bethlehem. So it's very possible that Joseph would have went to his childhood home. And it's not that there was no room in the inn, no room in the house. Mary was about to give birth any moment. In Jewish law, when a woman gives birth, she is ritually unclean until the 8th day. Anything she touches, anyone she comes in contact with is ritually unclean. This was the law. So, people, this is the census. People are everywhere. So it's very possible that Joseph's parents would have set up a birthing room in the barn to give Mary and Joseph privacy and keep everyone and everything in the house clean, ritually clean. You see? I never thought of that before, did you? It kind of gives a little different, like, makes you go, Now this doesn't really change the story at all because Mary is still in a cattle stall, right? I think, she's still thinking, and Joseph's thinking, this is not the way it's meant to be. It was still disappointing. It was still depressing. It was still hard. Life can be that way. Jesus' birth came in the midst of messiness and disappointment and pain. He was born in a stable among the animals, and his first bed was a feeding trough. When you have time, think of the significance of that. Amidst all this hardship, Mary and Joseph, what they experienced during this journey, God was working to redeem the world. They didn't know that. This was not a journey that Mary and Joseph wanted to take. It was not how either of them imagined it to be. And of course, it was not the last of Mary and Joseph's unwanted journeys. Later, they had to flee to Egypt. And of course, later, Mary witnesses the torture and crucifixion of her son. We all take unwanted journeys in this life. Life will have its moments of disappointments, overwhelmedness, sorrow, and pain. But the good news of Scripture is that God not only walks with us on these journeys, God redeems them and brings good from them. The Bible is filled with stories like this. Joseph sold as a slave by his brothers, but that wasn't the end of Joseph's story. David fleeing for his life from Saul when King Saul was trying to kill him, but that wasn't the end of David's story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace, but that was not the end of their story. The people of Judah exiled to Babylon for 50 years, but that wasn't the end of their story. A child born in a stable in Bethlehem who would later walk to Calvary. But this would not be the end of Jesus' story. If Jesus did not journey in this earthly life and show us how to live, and if he did not go to the cross, we would not be celebrating his birth year after year. All of us take unwanted journeys in this part of our eternal life. But we can trust that God walks with us. Think of this. As Mary was giving birth in that stable, she didn't know the angels were showing up to the shepherds. She knew nothing about that. She didn't know about the star that the wise men saw, that they would be traveling from so far. And certainly she would not have dreamed that her story would be told again and again for over 2,000 years. We do not see the bigger picture. We're not meant to see the bigger picture. That's why God is God and we are not. I think God suffers with us, cries with us. I invite you to trust. Especially if you're going, and we're all going through different things, but especially if there's something in particular you're going through right now, to have the faith that these difficult parts of your journey will not be the end of your story either. Because God uses everything for God's purpose. It doesn't mean God made it happen. That's different. Just want to throw that in there. Right? Life is life. Life is imperfect. Life is full of accidents and illnesses and death and all kinds of things. But God uses everything. Thanks be to a God who loves us enough from before we were in the womb, and travels with us in all of our earthly journeys. Amen.